Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Yesterday, a bombshell dropped on the comic book community, and that's that DC Comics, which has been located in New York City forever, is being relocated to Burbank, not only to join the rest of DC Entertainment, but to sit on the Warner Brothers studio lot. This is both a fascinating and worrisome development, not only for comic books, but for comic book movies coming from DC. And we'll get to that in a moment, but first I want to talk about one of the juiciest aspects of this story, and that's how it broke. Now, as you might already know, my other YouTube channel, Think About the Ink, is loosely affiliated with Bleeding Cool. And Bleeding Cool is a maverick comic book and movie news website based out of the UK. And the reason I say they're a maverick is because Rich Johnston, who runs the whole thing, a good friend of mine, doesn't really try to appease the big two publishers for the sake of getting exclusives and previews. He really focuses on, investigative journalism and breaking these kinds of big stories like he did yesterday with this DC move. And it's why DC Entertainment President Diane Nelson just truly hates him. So while a lot of DC employees are on good terms with Rich Johnston, and as he said, often give him scoops under the radar, she just absolutely hates him, and that's why officially, not unofficially, but officially, DC Comics and Bleeding Cool are really mortal enemies. And that's only going to get worse after this, because he totally broke the story, and Diane Nelson was unable to let her employees know first and had to quickly issue an official internal release, which of course popped up on Bleeding Cool. If you want to see the article, Rich's Scoop, I've put a link to it in the video description. So she had to assure everyone, who I'm sure was in a panic when they read this story, that anyone who worked for DC Comics would have the opportunity and be supported in a move from the East Coast to the West Coast. I mean, of course, even with a company's support, that is a tremendous upheaval in someone's life. And I think a lot of people are going to have to ask themselves if it's worth it, especially since so many people seem unhappy at DC right now. And it's probably only going to get worse when the suits are not across the country, but across the hall. And by suits, I mean the movie executives, which and even at New York Comic Con, Rich Johnston told a fascinating story about how it was the Warner Brothers executives who were responsible for Vertigo being really the death of Vertigo in a way. And that's because there was a meeting apparently about the different properties they had, and they talked about, and the DC people talked about some of their Vertigo properties, and Warner Brothers was like, well, why don't we make those into movies? And they said, well, it's a little tricky because the creators own some of the rights. And Warner Brothers executives said, well, that's stupid, change the contract. And they did. And now, of course, as everybody knows, no great material is going to Vertigo because, you would just be selling it off to Warner Brothers to do whatever they wanted with, and they would just be like, see ya, bye. And I think that's really a short-term strategy, because long-term, a great franchise can have wonderful payoffs. J.K. Rowling, I'm sure, takes a huge chunk of the Harry Potter money, but there's still a lot of money to go around, so much so that Warner Brothers doesn't want the franchise to end. So to do away with a contract in a imprint that was such a critical darling and an audience darling, I mean, it used to be that all Vertigo comics were great, and now Image has really, I think, filled that spot. But anyway, so that was already a problem, and that's when DC Comics was located on the East Coast. Now they're going West Coast. So that's what's going to happen there. And I also think that this begs another question. Which is the cart and which is the horse here? What's pulling who? And I understand that the movies make more money, so I think you would argue that they should be the horse. But I don't think that's true. I think the great stories come from the comics, and that's the horse. And then there's a very huge cart that it's pulling behind it. That's, I think, how it should work. I mean, look how the movies over at Marvel are benefiting from that. Even the ones that Fox is doing. X-Men Days of Future Past, everyone's excited about it, and it's based on a great comic book story that was dreamed up from the publishing arm of Marvel. And I think that's fantastic. And I think that they're pulling the Ultron storyline that was developed by the creative people over at Marvel Comics. And I think that, let these comic book companies be the think tanks for your movies. Instead of, I feel what DC is starting to do is just making it another way to promote their movies. Like, for instance, a number of you have pointed out the Justice League War trailer to me, which is, basically a Justice League origin story from the New 52 storyline that Jeff Johns came up with. And I feel that that is a very strong indicator that they are planning a Justice League movie, and so they're trying to introduce it in the inception of it to audiences. And I think that's a shame. I think that and I think that story was weak even when I read it on the page. I'd be surprised if it was stronger on the screen. And I think the whole thing just stinks of being a way to set up a Justice League movie. It's not great storytelling. So I think, I've said many times that I want the movie studios to take a bigger interest in their comic book companies, both Disney and Warner Brothers. But this isn't what I meant. I don't think this is what's going to happen. I don't think that Warner Brothers is bringing DC Comics to the lot to let them flourish. I think it's to just bring them more and more under their control, which is just tearing DC Comics apart. I know I'm reading less and less of them. I know a number of you have said that you're reading less and less. Less and less of my stack is being taken up by DC Comics, despite the fact that they are churning out so much content that they take up most of the shelf at the comic book store. It's an inverse thing. They take up more space in the store, but less space in my personal reading. So I'm curious what you guys think of this move. Do you think it's going to be good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think this is just the death knell of DC Comics? And they're just going to be movies? I'd be interested to know what you think. Because also, David Goyer, as some of you have pointed out, just got a first look deal with Warner Brothers, and he is just really becoming entrenched there. And I wanted him gone. And so I just think that DC and Warner Brothers couldn't be making more mistakes in this area. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Fascinating, juicy stuff. I love that stuff. Okay, so the second story of the day, oh yes. Remember Olympus Has Fallen? It beat White House down to the punch to theaters, and it did actually pretty well. I thought it was a weak film, and it was just such a strong Die Hard ripoff. I was like, I can't, it really was plagiarism, I felt, especially in the one scene between Dylan McDermott and Gerard Butler, which was just straight out of Die Hard. It was almost shocking to watch. But the movie made a lot of money at the box office. It did well. It was the victor of the two White House attack movies. So they're making a sequel. London Has Fallen. And Aaron Eckhart will still be the president. Gerard Butler is back on his Secret Service detail. They're on a gig, a diplomatic gig over in London. And I think they're attending a funeral, and they have to stop some kind of assassination. I don't know if I don't know why the president would be directly involved in this. But I don't know. I like Aaron Eckhart. I like Gerard Butler. I feel, and Morgan Freeman's also coming back. I think they're all talented actors, but I feel this kind of material doesn't serve them well. It just strengthens their image as B-movie actors. Like, you put this next to I, Frankenstein for Eckhart, and you're like, weren't you Two-Face at one point? What are you doing, buddy? He's a nice guy, too. So I think that, I guess if there's money on the table to be made, you can't fault anyone for going after it. But again, short-term game versus long-term game. What are they playing here? I think this is a short-term goal, and I think that Gerard Butler should have taken the win here at the box office because he produced Olympus Has Fallen and spun it into something a little more concrete instead of just being like, hey, I survived the first time. Let's jump off the cliff again. All right, so that's the second story of the day. The third story is that Charlie Hunnam left 50 Shades of Grey over scripting problems, and interestingly, even though they told him, we're not changing anything, they are actually doing rewrites on the script. So it was they pushed the date back to December, but they feel they can still make their release date in August 2014, opposite Guardians of the Galaxy, a big matchup there. But apparently Patrick Marber came in to already do a rewrite. He did a rewrite on Closer. He's a screenwriter on Closer, Notes on a Scandal. He's a theatrical guy. He did a rewrite, but apparently they're still not happy. So they brought in another guy. His name he's not a well-known screenwriter, Mark Bomback. And he's not a real-known screenwriter for a reason. The guy is a hack. He wrote The Wolverine, which some of you liked. I thought it had problems, but that's the best thing on his resume. He also wrote the Total Recall remake. He wrote Unstoppable, which was okay. That's the Chris Pine, Denzel Washington film. And then he wrote Live Free or Die Hard. I don't understand why somebody, again, I have this conversation all the time here on this channel. I don't understand why somebody would look at that writer's resume and go, that's the guy for me. Like, for instance, I was talking just the other day about how Bill Condon, coming off of The Fifth Estate, one of the biggest flops of the year, maybe almost of all time, gets a job on another film doing a rewrite. It just makes no sense to me that they would consider, I think he was rewriting Hugh Jackman's musical, the Barnum and Bailey one, I believe. And it's just so ridiculous to me, and then they get a bad movie, and they're like, I wonder how that happened. I'm like, history repeats itself. Just look at the guy's resume. He doesn't know how to write. No offense to Mark Bomback. I'm sure he's a very nice guy. Or maybe he's not. Maybe he's a Hollywood player, and he's just schmoozing these guys and getting them to, studios to give him opportunities he shouldn't have. So it's disheartening, it's discouraging, especially when I'm sure there are great screenwriters out there who are absolute geniuses who can't get work. It's just very frustrating. I wonder who Mark Bomback knows. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. Crazy news day. Let's get to today's question. And today's question comes from Jesus Castrahan, but one of the reasons I'm answering it is that Anthony Leach said, you have to answer this guy's question. So not only was a question asked, but it was seconded. So who am I to deny the answer then? All right, so the question is, Grace, what are your thoughts on the future of the movie formats, IMAX versus 3D? And so he elaborates, and he says, I think 3D format is a waste of money that adds little to nothing and cheap movie effects that is seen in every movie. And it has not been improved since it was first seen in Avatar. And I also think this format is only for the studios to make more money, or he says mo money, I like that. I like your style, Jesus. And get their billion-dollar movie on the lists. Totally. IMAX and 3D are movie steroids, as I've said before. He says, well, on the other hand, IMAX is a more crisp image and immersing surround sound. I think both formats have a problem. I think when they're used correctly, they're amazing. I actually, no offense to you, Jesus, or Anthony, who seconded the question, I actually really like 3D. I think when used correctly, it is stunning, and I think it really enhances the movie-going experience. I think if you didn't see The Great Gatsby in 3D, you missed out, and probably that's one of the reasons you might not have liked it. I think in 3D, it was like watching a movie in a snow globe. It was haunting, beautiful, and I don't think you would have got that immersive experience, almost like a painting, with 2D. And Hugo was very well done, and a lot of people think Gravity is primarily a great film because of its use of 3D and IMAX. But I think that what's killing both of these formats is not from the creative angle, but the business angle. First of all, when it comes to IMAX, the IMAX company has made a number of IMAX theaters that aren't true IMAXs. I only think it's worth going to the IMAX when you get that 5-story tall experience. There's a great one here in New York City on 68th and Broadway. It's just phenomenal. When the right movie on that screen, just even watching the intro when they do the countdown from the IMAX company is like going on a ride. I just couldn't enjoy it more. But I have to say, it's been a long time since I've gone to see an IMAX movie because there's so few IMAX theaters that, again, this is a problem with the way theaters run themselves. People come in late. Last time I tried to see Elysium in there, people came in while the movie was starting. There was confusion because it's assigned seating over where people were sitting. I missed the first 10 minutes of the movie because people were getting up and it was distracting. And I actually left and had to go downstairs and watch it on a big screen, but it wasn't IMAX because I just was like, I missed the whole beginning of the movie. I'm not into it. So I think that, this apathetic approach to movie-going is very frustrating to me. So I think if all IMAX screens were great and there were more of them, more people would pay for the IMAX experience. And the same goes for 3D. I think that a lot of movie studios want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have a film that can play both in 2D and 3D. They don't want you to go to the 2D showing and be very aware that you've missed out. They want you to be able to watch it at home on your 2D television and also not feel that you've missed out. But then why have 3D? I think a movie needs to really embrace that it's meant to be seen in 3D, and that's when they do really well. That's when you get your Avatar, and that's when you get your Gravity. So I think that if these technologies were used correctly and by artists, and they were used for their best purposes, they would be successful. But people keep getting burned, and Hollywood is just so greedy that I think it doesn't work. And I saw The Avengers, by the way, in 2D and 3D, and I much more enjoyed the 3D experience. I even like it when it's just a little immersive. I like being brought a foot into the movie almost, like taking a step into the screen. I am a fan of the technology, but at the same time, I've seen some movies where I've been like, that was kind of a waste of my money. Iron Man 3, I think, was the last film that I saw in 3D where I was like, it didn't need to be in 3D. So I think these could be great, and I think Hollywood could be able to have great 3D IMAX experiences that are creatively and financially rewarding. But again, they just have so little faith and regard for their audience that they feel audiences, they can just dupe them however they want. And it's frustrating. So that's my answer to your question. Thank you for asking. Thank you, Anthony, for seconding it. And so that's today's morning movie news. Please write down below what you think of the top 3 stories and the viewer question and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.